Okay. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Hey, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Okay. I'm assuming you don't want to hear me sing anymore. So we'll get comfortable here. We have water. We have microphones. And hopefully people will have some questions. Does anyone have a, not to ask it yet, because I have a question to start with, or maybe two, but do people have questions they want to ask? Okay, so people have questions, that's good. So when we had our congregational mission to Israel in February of 24, and we met the public intellectual thinker, his first name, it's not Chaim, it's but Retik Gur. Haviv. So we met Haviv Retik Gur, who I've listened to and read, and he shared with us a piece of a document written in the late 19th or early 20th century of a Muslim cleric in Egypt castigating the Palestinians of Jerusalem for allowing the Jews to have any dignity whatsoever, basically. And he was demonstrating or explaining that there is a war going on in Islam between those who want to reform it in the same way that Catholicism went through a Reformation, Christianity went through a Reformation, Judaism to some degree or another has gone through a Reformation or two, but that Islam has not, in terms of dealing with some ancient attitudes and finding ways to rationalize and bring them forward in a different way. And in the book, it seems pretty clear that there is a factor at play in terms of shame, of being a second class, like of having the Jews be at equal or higher standing than they are. And I think that understanding that dynamic as much as it's at play in modern society, because that's something that I know, or at least I hear, that other Muslim cultures are working to change, like in Saudi Arabia. how much
UAE more than Saudi Arabia.
UAE more, and how much is that at play then? How much is it still at play today? And how should us Western people and Jewish people who don't have the same value system, how can we understand decisions or attitudes when they come out of that different context?
Can everybody hear me? I think you're right that in this period there's real resentment on the Arab side that the Jews are being treated as an equal partner. I think on the Arab side, for the most part, the word interlopers is used, for example, not just by the Mufti, but by other Arab representatives, that the Jews are seen as this minority of interlopers. Actually, the Mufti says in his testimony I think it's to the Appeal Commission, he says, this is a minority of interlopers that had no great standing in this country before the Great War, World War I. There's also, certainly in a person like the Mufti, there's also just a sort of a theological resentment, as it were, that these people, their religion is clearly wrong and superseded and abrogated and corrupted, and therefore why are we paying attention to them? So it's this whole mix of, it's not even, nowadays I think we have the habit of thinking of first class and second class citizens, and Arab citizens of Israel will complain that they're that they don't have all the rights that Jews have, for example. But really, it's less a matter in this period, I think, of second-class citizenship that the Arabs are complaining about, but rather, why are we, the majority, who have been inhabiting this land for centuries, being put on a level with these quote-unquote interlopers from Europe who we've always had a Jewish minority here, and that's fine, but why are they coming in such large numbers? Why are they making these political demands? Why are they getting too big for their, what's the expression? Their britches. Is that it? So I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. And let's kick it out to questions. Right here first.
Is there going to be a hostage deal?
I read the same news as all of you. My understanding is that Bezrat Hashem, it's going to begin tomorrow with the first only eventually over 42 days of the first phase of the deal. 33 hostages. We hope as many of them as possible are alive, but we don't know. The first, I think, 3 are meant to come out tomorrow. And then a few days after that, another 4, I believe, and then it's going to be spread out over a few weeks. So it's going to be a very emotional, difficult, but also happy, we hope, few weeks. And so I hope we see them coming out tomorrow.
And remember that the last deal in November of 23 fell apart when Hamas stopped living up to what had been negotiated. So we don't know. I think Israelis don't know on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis. It's going to be a wait and see and hope for the best and deal with it as they do. But Andy, you had a question?
Knowing what you know and all the research you did about the early Zionists within the 20th century, the Jabotinskis, the Ben-Gurions, the Weizmanns, I'm wondering if they were here today, what they would think about the Zionism that's being practiced today in the government and by a certain portion of the population, how they would feel about direction.
It's a very good question. Did everyone hear the question? Was that a yes or a no? No. Okay. The gentleman asks if the prominent figures of my period, quote unquote, of the 1930s, were here today, prominent Zionist figures like Chaim Weizmann, head of the World Zionist Organization, Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, Zev Jabotinsky, head of revisionist, more right-wing the Zionist movement of that time. What would they say about the Israel of today and some certain actors in the Israeli government? Is that a fair paraphrase? I think maybe I'll start with Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky was, he's one of, I really, as I mentioned in my talk, I really try to tell this story through a few sort of hand-picked characters on each side. And Jabotinsky is one of the Jewish, and Ben-Gurion and Weizmann are some of the characters who I return to in the book. Jabotinsky, who actually, he dies suddenly in 1940 in New York, or close, right?
Yeah,
Right? Yeah, in the New York area. He dies unexpectedly, so he never gets to see, he never really learns about the Holocaust. He never sees the state of Israel being born. But had he lived, you know, Jabotinsky was, his orientation was more right-wing and more willing to take up arms. But he was also kind of liberal in the old sense of the term. Namely, he really exalted the individual. He really valued the individual and the individual's place in society. Individual freedoms. He was not one for coercion, whether religious or otherwise. He was really quite pragmatic and practical in many ways. And you know, he actually had a lot of positions which, if they were uttered today, would be considered quite left-wing, quite progressive. Such as, you know, he thought that for every Jewish minister in the Jewish state, there should be an Arab, was it co-minister or deputy minister? Very radical ideas for the time being. He also, there was a certain point in the Peel Commission of 1937, one of the proposals that the commissioners make is a population transfer, namely transferring Arabs out of the Jewish state and Jews into the Arab state. And he opposed this completely. He said there's no need for anyone to go anywhere. There's enough room here, particularly when we bring over the great masses of Jews from Europe. So all of this is to say that without naming names, there are certain members of the current Israeli government whose names you've seen in the news quite a bit, who I think it's fair to say Jabotinsky would not approve of them by any means. He wouldn't consider them his ideological heirs or successors. And of course, Ben-Gurion and Weizmann also wouldn't. But although these unnamed people may claim Jabotinsky as their ideological forefather, I suspect these same unnamed people would be rejected by him. Just to focus on, yeah.
And Jabotinsky was also much more of a realist in terms of understanding the Arab mind's perspective, right?
Good point.
Which was, whereas the labor Zionists, and whether they believed it or not, were willing to at least operate under the idea that of colonialism, that they were going to bring culture and education and money, and the Arabs of the area would just be lifted up and that they would be welcoming of this progress. And Jabotinsky was a realist and said, no, they're not. They have their own nation, their own peoplehood. They're going to fight this tooth and nail. And one of the things that it seems I was picking up in the book is that the willingness of the labor Zionists to keep that myth going longer also led to more disaffection in the West, like especially in Europe, with the behavior of the Yishuv when they had to respond in violence, right? So that whereas Jabotinsky was very straightforward, saying, no, this is going to be a war. There's going to be this has to be settled, basically in a competing nation, competing national claims and national interests kind of way, whereas labor Zionists were trying to cajole the European powers to say, oh, they'll come around. They'll they'll love the technology. They'll love the education. They're gonna it's gonna be very good for them. Right. But that then also led to did that also lead to the European kind of backlash against the Yishuv and Israelis when they insisted on political independence?
Right. Jabotinsky had the famous Iron Wall essay of exactly 100 years ago, 1925, in which essentially he says, the Arabs will fight us until they see that there's no point to it any longer. Once they see that the the wall is insuperable. And so, yeah, it was, his attitude was at the same time kind of a little, was more kind of respectful and cognizant of Arab nationalism and Arab nationalist feeling, but also in some ways less compromising politically, because he said from the beginning that the goal was a Jewish state. And Ben-Gurion and company, the labor Zionists, were much more kind of coy about that, even though that was probably the ultimate goal. They didn't say so as explicitly.
In reading the book, outside forces, European forces, British forces, always seem to be imposing their suggestions, which basically screws everything up. And the solution has to be internal between Jewish and Arab. Back in the early 30s, Ben-Gurion had this idea of a Jewish state within an Arab confederacy. And he approached the idea and bothered Arabs at least listen to it, didn't accept it, listen to it. And then they ran up to blew it up, ended it. And now, 85 years later, you still have all the same problems. So with your background and your investigation, now we have Trump coming in with the Abraham Accords. Is it possible, in your mind, looking forward, is it possible with an Israeli state, with an Arab confederacy with Saudi Arabia and Jordan, having an Arab confederacy with a Jewish state living side by side?
Well, I think, put it this way, in terms of the Europeans screwing things up, I think that was how you put it at the time. I think that's true in large part. They screwed a lot of things up, starting with appointing the Grand Mufti, in the first place. But I think it's maybe a little too easy to blame everything on the British, blame everything on European powers. And I sense this impulse a lot with my Israeli friends and family that, oh, if not for the Brits, everything would be fine. But, you know, maybe this is my slight Anglophilia showing here, but I think you have to admit that without the opportunities afforded by the British mandate, there wouldn't be a state of Israel in 1948. And we can discuss and debate the various motivations that drove the British, but you know, without the opportunities afforded by the mandate that the Jews had to rise to, the Brits weren't going to do it for them. But the opportunities presented, you know, maybe in 100 years, maybe in 200 years, the Jews would have gotten there themselves. But the just tremendous progress that the Jews make in 3 decades of the mandate, a very short amount of time between the world wars, after the First World War and then, of course, until 48, simply would not have happened without the British. If you look at the Ottoman era, how slowly things moved in that period, you'll see, yeah.
So it's like the movie, The Life of Brian, where they're railing against, you know, the Monty Python, they're like acting out the story of Jesus, but in a strange parallel. And
Judean People's Front.
The Judean People's Front, and you know, what have the Romans done for us lately? Well, they built the aqueducts. They brought us water. Okay, but what have they done for us lately?
That's an even better way of explaining. Exactly. It's like, what have the British done for us? Well, there's the Balfour Declaration, right? There was the mandate. There was immigration.
Haganah.
You know, public health, roads. There was a lot. Now, there's a lot from a Jewish perspective to resent the Brits for. The white paper being the obvious one. You know, so just on. I hope that answers the question about the kind of, yeah.
Was there another question over here before we go back to the other side? Yes, sir.
I didn't know about the Arabs leaving during the uprising. Do you have any information about the Nakba, if they're calling it Nakba? What percentage of the Arab community left voluntarily, and what percentage were expelled?
Yeah, the question is about 1948. Yes, the question is about 1948, the Israeli War of Independence, the Nakba, as the Palestinians describe it. And the gentleman asked how many how many Palestinians were driven out versus fled. I think that's the crux of the question.
Yeah.
This is the moment in the discussion where I note that my book ends in 1939. I'm not getting into. In fact, in the epilogue of my book deals with everything from 1939 until today, and I deal very briskly with that question, simply because there are a number of books out there on it, some of which are very good. I think Benny Morris, 1948, is an excellent book, very readable. If you want to get a little nerdier and more granular about it, his book, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, Revisited, is the newest version. Very granular. There's an appendix at the end in which the reason for each Arab locale is listed, and there's a code, the reason for its depopulation, whether a military assault, whisper campaign, expulsion, and you can see there the various. So that, yeah.
You'd have to look into it in more depth. Way in the back. Yes, sir.
It's a very good question. The gentleman asks, where is this this moderate Palestinian that he keeps hearing about back then and today? And in my book, I think one of the characters who I think readers have really been drawn to in my book is a guy named Musa Alami, who is from a prominent Arab Jerusalem family. He's probably the first Arab from Palestine to attend Cambridge, or certainly one of the first. Very brilliant man. And he's an Arab nationalist, full stop, but he also has a lot of friendships across ethnic and religious lines, one of whom, is David Ben-Gurion. And their relationship is I kind of use as almost